2, 1, and we're going live. I want to welcome everybody to healthyseminars.com. My name is Lauren Brown. I'm the founder of Healthy Seminars and also clinical director of AccuBalance Wellness Center in Vancouver, BC. I'm going to do a little housekeeping, and then my friend and colleague Sharon Weisenbaum is going to introduce our speaker today. Suzanne is going to be talking on some herbal remedies. We have a series going on, classical Chinese herbal principles in action in response to the virus that cannot be named. Before I do that, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping, as I always do at the start of these, because there's always a few new people. Some of you have heard this so many times, I may get you to do this for me. We'll have guest people doing housekeeping. I just want to let you know on the resource page, we have healthyseminars.com/resources. We keep adding new content to this like daily. So do check it out. There are anchors up here. So we have stuff on telehealth, topical webinars, TCM knowledge on the virus that cannot be named. We got a lot of stuff there, Conscious Tuesdays, etc. And then here's where we are at. Classical Chinese herbal principles in action response to COVID. So you just scroll down. We have what's kind of coming up in the short term, this little calendar that you can see here. So today we're doing Xiao Tang and Gui Zhi Tang. And you can see later on today. So come back. We have a watch party with the late Ray Rubio. What's your story? To having an authentic five keys to having authentic, inspiring life and practice. I just want to highlight that because it is today. On April 16th, and it is something that will open your heart. And I really encourage you to come. Doesn't matter what your field is, whether you treat fertility, whatever you treat. This is for, if you're a human being, this talk's for you. So you can just see we have a whole bunch of talks coming up this week. So there's the calendar, and then you can see we have sections. Telehealth, we just added another one, a follow-up one from CT has been added to the website. So check that out. That's on the website page. Some of the topical stuff we got happening. We added a TCM knowledge since you've been on here last, guys, just to let you know. So we got a series of TCM knowledge around the virus that cannot be named. So you can see a series of this. And it goes on and on and on. And then when we get down to the herbal, you can see the dates here, okay? And we open them up a couple days in advance where you can sign up. So you have to sign up for each one. And just to let you know, on April 21st, so after this one, the next one will be on Tuesday, April 21st, and it's a double header. So I just want to let you know that there really are two happening that day. So set your schedule for that. And there's just lots of stuff. So that's all found on healthyseminars.com/resources. And you can get to that through the homepage. It's halfway down on the middle of the page. During this time of staying at home order or isolation, our goal here at Healthy Seminar is to give you information, knowledge, to keep that brain working, and also to create community. Our tagline is right now, community, unity, immunity, and this is why we have our cameras on. So during the lecture, you can chat with your friends, and then at the end, we're going to ask you, or even during, if you have a question, raise your hand digitally. That button says under participants, or raise your hand at the bottom of your laptop. Raise your hand and we will open up your mic so you can actually ask the questions. We'll have a panel at the end with Sharon and Suzanne. Again, raise your hand and you can ask your questions. And then we open up the mic. We open up the mic for all of us where we get to send our love, appreciation to each other. We get to say hi to each other that we see on the screen. And this is because we have physical distancing. However, we believe in social solidarity, social innovation. So this is our chance to still connect with each other. Last thing I want to let you know is when we started putting these series of lectures together, Conscious Tuesday, Throwback Thursday, and then Sharon came up with this brilliant idea about classical Chinese herbal principles and actions, virus that cannot be named. When our whole goal was to create community and just get information out there, lots of free resources. Now, we still have scheduled courses for CEUs that you pay for. We weren't really expecting you to want to jump on those just because of the situation. It seems like people are enjoying those. We put this site on sale because somebody requested us to do that. We weren't even thinking of it because we didn't think people would really have an interest in their CEUs at this time. But the site is on sale for on-demand courses, and you save 25% off, and the coupon code is healthy25. You can find that coupon on the resource page at the bottom as well. And that is on all on-demand courses. So Sharon has a lot of courses. They're all herbal, so you can use that coupon on her on-demand courses. And she has a great module on clarifying diagnosis, 54 CEUs. And if you had taken her clarifying diagnosis through Pro-D Seminars Legacy way back when, not only will you save 25% on the new version, the new one's 54 hours, the old one was 19 hours, but we will refund you what you paid for the old version on Pro-D. So it's a pretty good savings, and many people are taking advantage of that. So that's wonderful. And we got Dr. Feng Sherlun and many herbalists on our site. So if you love herbs and you're using it for telehealth now, we got some resources for you. So I just wanted to share that with you. The live upcoming webinars that we have that are approved for CEUs, just so you know, the coupon doesn't apply for them because we already have them on sale as an early bird. And we've just decided while we're in isolation, we are not going to expire the early birds, even though there's an expiry date. When we come out of isolation, then it will change. But while we're all, majority of us are in isolation, we're just keeping the live webinars on sale. So the coupons don't work for that. And we said that the Healthy 25 will work until the end of April 30, 2020. However, if we're still in isolation, we're going to keep it going as well. Anyways, I want to share with you now, or bring up Sharon. She is my friend and my colleague, and she's transformed so many people's practices based on the knowledge and experience she shares. So I'm grateful that she's put this series together. I do want to share with you that what you're hearing today is for educational purposes only. This is not medical advice. It's not intended to be medical advice. It should not be received as medical advice. If you have a health condition, if you're not well, if you have a health condition, please seek out a healthcare provider, because this is for educational purposes only. And when we put this series together and all the other TCM knowledge related to COVID, it's all based on Chinese principles. We are not treating a disease. We're not treating COVID. We are treating the individual and their presentation, no matter what the disease they have. And so I just wanted to share that with you guys as well. And now, Sharon, I'm going to mute myself, and I'm looking forward to your introduction. And Suzanne, I'm looking forward to learning from you today.
Thank you, Lauren. Yeah, so we've been doing this series, and so far we've talked a lot about formulas that go up and out, like Ma Hong Tong and Gui Zhi Tang, and also combining with herbs that go down and in other words, integrating Yang Ming. And so today we're going to be looking at the pivot. And I think you'll find that the way we're looking at the pivot is somewhat unique. In other words, we're looking at Xiao-Yang disorders. And really, we think of this pivot function as after the Yang comes down from heaven, it has to actually pivot to change direction to become the ministerial fire. And that when it's not able to pivot, is when we start to have troubles in the body. And in terms of the kinds of things we're facing right now with the virus, this pivot problems people can have pivot problems before they got sick that then make it hard for them to process the illness. And also, especially in the recovery phase, we've been finding that it shows up with issues in the pivot that make these kinds of formulas useful. So that's an introduction to the topic, and now an introduction to Suzanne Connole. And I've known Suzanne for a super long time, and she and her daughter have visited our farm, and so we've been friends for a long time. And Suzanne is a teacher in her own right. She ran the Herbal program at Tri-State College in New York. And Suzanne, I don't know how many years you've been practicing, but you can
16, I think 16.
Yeah. And she's also a TA in the graduate mentorship program, so helping students in reviewing their cases. And so I'm very delighted that Suzanne chose to teach about this formula. It's Xiao Chai Hu Tong and Chai Hu Gui Zhi Tang. So Suzanne Connole, welcome.
Thank you, Sharon. Okay. Okay, does that look right? There we are. All right. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much to Lauren and the Healthy Seminars team for facilitating this, this incredible series of lectures, and also all the other things that you're offering. I think it's really, really helpful to us at this time, and I really appreciate it. And thank you, Sharon, for all of your wisdom and all of your teaching that you've shared with us over the years, and all the support you've given us, and the opportunity to then share it with the rest of you all. It occurred to me this week during a meditation, I was thinking about, you know, why are we doing this, and how is this helping us, this series of lectures in this moment and time, and thinking about how we're all trying so hard to figure out ways to help our patients, and how to treat this virus, the virus that cannot be named, right? Because the virus feels scary and new and confusing. And the information is confusing. There's a lot of conflicting information. It feels to me a little bit dizzying and out of control, right? You just read and read and read, and you get all these conflicting ideas, and it can be really confusing. And so sometimes that can create this kind of panic feeling, like, oh my God, I know nothing. I can't do anything. I can't treat. I don't know what to do for the virus, right? And by coming back to the fundamentals from the Shanghan Lun of these formulas, we can really ground ourselves in the roots of our medicine, right? And when we ground ourselves, we get clarity. And with clarity, we can see through the chaos and the chatter and all the stuff that's happening, and really be able to just see the signs and symptoms and the patterns for these formulas that are proving to be really, really helpful in the treatment of the virus. So I hope that from here, we can learn how to use these formulas a little bit better, and from there, treat patients and help people. So today, we will be discussing the formula Xiao Chai Hu Tang, which is the key formula for treating the Xiaoyang conformation. And we'll also discuss a little bit Chai Hu Gui Zhi Tang. Chai Hu Gui Zhi Tang is actually a modification of Xiao Chai Hu Tang. And I'll speak mostly about Xiao Chai Hu Tang. And I feel like I could probably talk about this formula for 3 or 4 hours, but I'm going to try to really focus our conversation on the symptoms and the diagnostics and the modifications of the formula that pertain to how the virus is presenting in our patients. So I do hope that it will be helpful for you all. So we talked about, in the first couple lectures, which I hope that you all saw, we talked about the other yang conformations, about how the yang conformations need to be able to move and be permeable, right? And the Xiaoyang is the same, right? I think in school we learn about the Xiaoyang as a place, right? We learn it as like half in or half out, or half exterior, half interior. We learn about it not on the surface, not in the organs. And when we learn it as a place, I think it puts us in that picture. Sorry, I don't have the picture, but if you remember the picture from Sharon's first lecture, that picture of our body with layers, right? And the Xiaoyang layer is this middle layer, right? And when we see our body in this way, it also leads to the narrative of it's our body against the world, right? And that our body must, you know, protect ourselves from the outside world and create a force field of the immune system to keep everything that's outside out, and, you know, everything that's inside in. And in that place, then when we see the Xiaoyang as the middle place, it also leads us to the narrative of the pathogens coming in and getting stuck there, right? And we learn that theory of lingering pathogens, right? That like pathogens get stuck in this middle place and can't get out and can't go in. And so we kind of learn it that way and try to treat it that way. But when we look at the formula and we look at the herbs and the formulas, it doesn't actually make sense. Like that narrative doesn't really make sense and doesn't help us understand how to use it. So I think that if we return to Sharon's narrative, right, of that our body is in a continuous relationship with the outside world, and that we must actually be permeable to it, right? We need to be able to let in life, stimuli, information, nutrition, right? We need to be able to let it all in to us and take it in, down and out, as we talked about that movement coming down and in, in, not out, and do something with it, process it, allow it to shift direction and come back up and out. So this continuous interplay with the outside world is actually essential to our own health. And the outside world includes the viruses, right? So we need to be able to take it in, come in contact with it, and hopefully manage it. And when we remember the picture of the wheel of life that Sharon told us about, we can see that we need to keep the movement continuous and smooth and easy, right? And so when we encounter something from the outside world, we bring it in and do something with it. And then the wheel keeps turning and brings it back up and out, back out to the world. And that movement needs to keep continuing. So I hope that when we think of it this way, we'll see the Xiaoyang in a very different way, right? We'll see the Xiaoyang more as a function and as a movement rather than a location. So we talked about the Taiyang and how it needs to go up and out in order to be healthy. And the Yangming, the movement is down and in. And so then what does it leave the Xiaoyang? The Xiaoyang is actually the shifting or the changing of directions, the movement through the changing of directions as yang comes in and down into our bodies and then shifts and pivots upwards, right? So this is how we define the Xiaoyang as the pivot or the hinge in the doorway, right? It's not the location, but rather that it pivots between the exterior and the interior and allows for the movement and communication between exterior and interior, right? And the job of the Xiaoyang is to keep the pivot open, right? So that the free flow of qi through the pivot connecting exterior and interior is uninhibited, open and moving and permeable. So in our narrative of the wheel coming down and in, the pivot is the changing directions, right? It's the movement of changing directions from down and in to up and out. Okay. So if we think about the Xiaoyang as a pivot, I'm actually gonna read you this quotation from Liu Luhong, translated by Sharon, that she shared with us in her lectures in the GMP. So he says, what is necessary to bring about this process of opening and closing? We must have a hinge or a pivot mechanism. If the opening and closing is more frequent, the opening and closing must be more agile. And for this, the hinge mechanism must also be agile. The more remarkable the opening and closing, the more remarkable the hinge mechanism. It is the question of grasping the hinge mechanism and the grasping of the concept of Xiaoyang. From where does this opening and closing and the ability to change position come from? From the hinge mechanism. That is why when we speak of Xiaoyang, we are in part referring to a pivot and in part referring to the ministerial fire. These inherent meanings vividly emerge. So I'm actually going to go back a slide here. Nope, I'm not. All right. And he, in this quotation, I think he describes the hinge mechanism and the movement through the hinge very well. And through there, we have the in and the out and the up and the down movement of the qi mechanism of the body, right? He mentions the ministerial fire. And I think it's worth talking a little bit about what the ministerial fire is, because I know that in school, I didn't really learn this concept very well at all. We say that the Xiaoyang is the confirmation of the ministerial fire. And what does this mean, right? I feel like defining the ministerial fire is really just a matter of a position, location, and function, right? In all our definitions in Chinese medicine. So when we start with that, the yang or the fire that comes into our body from heaven or the universe, to become the imperial fire of the heart, right? This fire needs to go somewhere, and we've learned that it needs to come down and into our body, right? And as it comes down and in through the Yangming in a smooth and open way, it must root or find position. The place where it finds position is in the lower body, in the with the Mingmen fire, right? Communicating with the Mingmen fire, right? And from there, there's a pivoting, right? A shifting of direction. So the fire comes in and then shifts position, right? And that from there
Rebooted.
is the
There's
physiological
probably crumbs in the
fire of
mouse
the
blood.
body.
That's probably what's
The
going
material
on.
fire becomes the physiological fire of the body. And that physiological fire is the physiological fire that comes up and out, right? Warming and spreading and reaching up and out. It's the fire that becomes the fire of the middle jiao to fuel transformation and transportation. It's the warmth within the blood, and it's the yang qi that comes all the way up to the surface to warm our body. So the function of the Xiaoyang, again, is to keep the pivot open to allow the ministerial fire to come down and in and to change direction, right? It's not that the Xiaoyang or the Sanjiao or the gallbladder is the ministerial fire. It's more that it facilitates it, right? It allows it to root into position and shift upwards to become the physiological fire of the body. So that's why we say the Xiaoyang is the confirmation of the ministerial fire. I hope that that makes sense. From here, if we understand, I'll read these two quotes too, again, a Xiaoyang as the pivot or the qi mechanism, right? So it's Dr. Fu Yanling writing about the ideas of Liu Duzhou. The qi dynamic is the movement of qi in four directions, inward and outward, upward and downward. This movement between inside and out, the continual interchange of ascent and descent, is called the qi dynamic and is vital to life of any kind. Liu Duzhou further pointed out that the zangfu organs associated with the movement of qi are the liver, gallbladder, spleen, and stomach. This is because the liver and gallbladder act as a pivot for the incoming and outgoing of qi between the exterior and the interior, while the spleen and stomach form the internal pivot for the ascent and descent of the qi of the zangfu. This concept plays a significant role in the treatment of diseases. These two quotes are talking about the qi dynamic and the four directions, right? Because we know that the Xiaoyang governs the pivot between the exterior and the interior, but the other pivot place is also the pivot place in the middle jiao of the up-bearing and the down-bearing. And the Xiaoyang also controls that pivot. And when we have Xiaoyang pathology, we'll see a lot of problems in that pivot place. All right. So I put this picture in here because this is another picture, I'm moving my mouse on it, I'll show you, of a way to understand the Xiaoyang. I think when we learn about the liver and we learn about the wood element, right, and the liver gallbladder, we just learn about this up and out movement. But actually, I think this picture is kind of a perfect representation of the formula Xiao Chai Hu Tang and how the Xiaoyang really works is that it is equally the up and the out movement and the down and the in movement that also spreads, right? They spread equally and then they meet at the sides. This is the interplay here, the communication between the interior and the exterior, right? So I think we can see the wheel of life moving through this, coming down and into the body, and then transforming and rooting here to become the ministerial fire, and then moving up and out, right? And we can see that wheel continually moving. This picture also shows us that interior axis, right? Axis between up-bearing and down-bearing, and the place of the middle jiao that is also controlled by the Xiaoyang pivot. So we can come back to this picture, I think, when we talk about the formula and how it works. So in understanding what the Xiaoyang is, what the function of the Xiaoyang is, I think it's quite easy then to understand the pathology. And we're going to go through the symptoms one by one, the symptoms that come up most in the treatment of the virus. So the pathology, if we think about the Xiaoyang as a doorway that needs to be opening and closing, and this smooth flow from the exterior to the interior, continual communication, right? We can understand then that the pathology is a lack of movement, specifically a lack of movement through the pivot areas, right? And we'll go through where those pivot areas are in the body, right? But when the Ming Men fire cannot come down and root, we end up with the stagnation as a primary symptom, right? And we'll see that many of the symptoms that come along with Xiaoyang pathology are those of stagnation, right? And that stagnation, that inability of the Ming Men fire, of the imperial fire to become the ministerial fire, can then affect all different organ systems, right? It can affect the fluid and the movement of fluid through the body. It can affect the digestion. It affects the movement of the emotions through the body and the blood through the body. So the inability of that pivoting to happen can affect the chi mechanism throughout the whole body, right? So when the fire comes in and cannot root in, and there's a block there, what happens to the fire, right? That fire is just going to go up, right? So that fire and that energy is going to go up. And we see that many of the symptoms of a Xiaoyang pathology are those of heat and wind flaring up, right? Because of an inability to root and pivot. So we'll go through the symptoms one by one so that we can understand this. In addition, then we learn that the Xiaoyang is the conformation of alternating heat and cold. Well, if all the symptoms are heat, then where's the cold coming from? Well, when the imperial fire cannot come in and root and become the ministerial fire to then warm and spread the whole body, we don't get that warmth and spreading up to the surface. And so we actually get cold. So we get this cyclical pattern of the heat, the pathological heat flaring up, and the inability of the physiological heat to warm. And I think we'll see that in the inability of the physiological yang to then also fuel transformation and transportation through the body, right? So we see this cyclical patterns of symptoms that happen from the pathological and the lack of physiological yang. Okay. So then as a treatment, right, our goal is to maintain the permeability of the Xiaoyang and its ability to be open, right, and to allow the pivoting and the turning. So our treatment method for Xiao Chai Hu Tang and for all Xiaoyang disorders is that of harmonizing, right? And if we think about what does the word harmonizing mean, it literally to bring things into harmony or to make things work together, right? So it means to bring two things that are separated and to bring them back into a working relationship or a functional relationship, right? So in the case of a Xiaoyang pattern, we've got the exterior and the interior not communicating, or the upper body and the lower body, the up and the down not communicating, right? And so, and they're not communicating because there's a block, right? And so when we open the pivot and we allow for movement there, we bring these things back into relationship or back into communication, right? The exterior moving into the interior and pivoting and allowing for the movement back up. So that's what we mean by harmonizing. And I pulled up these two clauses from the Shanghan Lun that show us what not to do, right? It's actually very important not to do these things because we'll damage the body. So in clause 264, it says, in Xiaoyang Zhongfeng, the ears cannot hear, the eyes are scarlet. If there's fullness in the chest and vexations, one should not induce vomiting or purgation. Vomiting and purgation will cause palpitations and fright. And clause 265, right after that, in Xiaoyang patterns, one cannot promote sweating, as promoting sweating will lead to delirious speech, which belongs to the stomach. If the stomach is harmonized, there will be recovery. And if the stomach is not harmonized, there will be vexation and palpitations. I think when they're talking about the stomach here, when Zhang Dongjing talks about the stomach here, he's talking about the fluids, right? And the health of the stomach and its ability to function. When the stomach is harmonized, it is moist, right? And there will be recovery. So we can't sweat it out. We can't go up and out as we would want to promote in a Taiyang pattern. And we also cannot go down and in, right? Because either way, we potentially damage yin, fluids, and qi, causing harm, causing palpitations, fright, vexation, right? And so what we need to do actually is oil the hinge, right? We need to open the Xiaoyang block, oil the hinge so that their opening and the closing is free flowing, right? So that's the idea of harmonizing in a Xiaoyang pattern. I think sometimes when people learn the formula, Xiao Chai Hu Tang, right? They learn it as, oh, these herbs, because there's mention in there, oh, these herbs support the right qi and expel the pathogen, right? And that puts us more back into that mindset that there's something bad in us that we need to get rid of. And actually the formula doesn't work that way, when we look at the herbs, you'll see there's not really anything that's expelling anything. In fact, what the herbs are doing is regulating movement, right? Removing blockages and opening and resolving blockage to restore movement. And when we restore movement, we restore function. And by restoring function, we shouldn't have symptoms anymore. So we're not trying to get rid of anything with this treatment method. And I think that's really important to remember, okay? All right. So let's talk about the key symptoms. So let's talk about the formula. Xiao Chai Hu Tang, minor bupleurum decoction. The formula's actions are many. The main action that's listed in the Bensky text is harmonizes the Xiaoyang, right? But I think that we can expand that a little bit with some more language that will help us see what's happening, right? We can say that Xiao Chai Hu Tang unblocks the pivot or turns the pivot, right? Or it acts as a key to unlock the pivot. That the formula opens constraint. It restores upbearing and downbearing. It promotes the movement from the exterior to the interior, and restores the qi mechanism. So all of these treatment principles, I think, are good to kind of have these words in our mind as we're trying to figure out whether or not to use the formula. So these are the two main clauses from the Shanghan Lun that lay out the symptoms. I'm going to try to focus on the symptoms that are most important to our diagnosis of the virus itself. So clause 263, in Xiaoyang illness, there is bitter taste in the mouth, dry throat, and dizzy vision. These three places are actually very important because these are three places that need to open and close. And opening and closing requires a pivot. So these three places are pivot places, right? They need to be opening and closing in order to function. These are places, and there's other ones, and we'll go over the other ones, right? These are places that receive both food and air and sensation and stimuli and everything, right? And also give back out. So that movement in and out needs to be very smooth, right? And I think it's important here to not limit ourselves to these specific symptoms, rather that these specific symptoms are representative of the pathology of fire and wind rising up, right? And we'll see that we can expand them to, if our patient doesn't have these specific symptoms, it doesn't mean that they don't have the pattern, right? Clause 96, in Shanghan Zhongfeng for 5 or 6 days, there is alternating fever and chills. There is pain and fullness of the chest and ribs. The patient is reluctant to speak with no desire for food and drink. Vexation and nausea, or vexation in the chest with no vomiting, or thirst or pain in the abdomen, or hard glowiness beneath the ribs, or palpitations below the heart, and urination that is not free, or no thirst and slight fever, or a cough, Xiao Chai Hu Tang governs. This clause can be a little overwhelming. There are so many symptoms here. And like I said, we're going to focus on the ones that are most important for the diagnosis for the virus in specific, all right? In both these clauses, though, all these symptoms reflect a malfunction of the pivot, right? A lack of movement through the doorways. So let's talk about the specific symptoms. Change this. All right, so the bitter taste, what does that mean? I mean, our patients never report a bitter taste, right? The bitter taste reflects the heat or the fire flaring up, the ministerial fire flaring up to the upper body. And so it's a heat sign in the mouth, right? Which is one of the pivot places, specifically from the gallbladder, right? And it comes from heat rising. Our patients, they never describe a bitter taste, right? So I think that we can expand this a little bit because patients may say, I have a bad taste in my mouth, or I have an acidy taste in my mouth, right? Or an unpleasantness happening in our mouth. And I think that we can also expand this a little bit to see it as emotional suffering, right? Because the Chinese character for bitter is also used in describing an emotional pattern of bitterness, right? Of suffering. So not so important to our treatment of the virus, but I think it's interesting to expand that understanding of bitter taste. The throat symptoms, the dry throat, right? This is very important actually to the treatment of the virus. And I think it's a key symptom that's often misunderstood, right? It is said that the Xiaoyang channel clasps the throat, and we know the channels, they pass right through the throat here on either side of the throat, right? And with the virus, it often starts in the throat. I've already seen a few cases this way, and I've read many, many case studies where the disease starts in the throat, right? And the symptoms of dryness and heat causing sore throat and swollen glands and pain there are, again, that heat flaring up, that ministerial fire that couldn't root, that flares up and is affecting a pivot place, the throat, right? This is the pivot place. So symptoms might be dryness, sore throat, swollen glands. I often actually see very telling is actually one-sided sore throat. I've had that myself many times, which is interesting because we know one-sided symptoms will often point us towards Xiaoyang symptoms, right? So in TCM treatment, throat symptoms are often treated with formulas like yin chao san and these bitter and cold herbs. And I don't really think that that's an appropriate treatment. And people often get worse. And I'm going to show you a case where someone got much worse with that kind of treatment. When we improve the movement through the pivot place is open, and the fire can then descend and root into the Ming Men, and those symptoms will disappear. I use Xiao Chai Hu Tang for sore throat all the time. I'll often add herbs like to direct it to the throat, like jiageng or zisuye or hopo, or some of the like lian xiao if there's swelling, and shugan, which we learned the other day with Allison. I think it's useful here to just differentiate between sore throat and scratchy throat, right? A scratchy throat is not painful. A scratchy throat is a symptom of a Taiyang stage, usually like a Gui Zhi Tang pattern, or maybe a Chaihu Gui Zhi Tang pattern. And that there's no swelling or pain. It's this scratchy, uncomfortable feeling. And we can put that more with a Taiyang stage rather than Xiaoyang, right? The Xiaoyang throat is sore and painful and swollen, right? There's a tightness there, which is actually a symptom with the virus very often, is a tightness in the throat before it affects the lungs. We'll see it in the throat. Dizzy vision. So again, this is something our patients will say, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't have dizzy vision. We can expand this though to include not just the eyes, but the head and the thinking and the thought, the ability to process thought. So it reflects a stuckness and a rising up of wind, right? So an unclear or tired and can't focus, or dizzy or spacey or fuzzy, unclear kind of movement feeling in the head is what patients may be able to identify with. What about the alternating fever and chills? This is key for both the virus and the formula, right? I think it's important right here to mention that it's not the fever, right? It's not the fever according to the thermometer. It's helpful to know if they have a fever according to a thermometer, but it's not diagnostic, right? The key is, how does the patient feel relative to their normal and to the environment, right? So we have to ask our questions very carefully here. Make sure that we're asking them, how do you feel? Do you feel hot? Do you feel chilled? All right. And the alternating fever and chills is code for a cyclical pattern of both heat and symptoms, right? A coming and a going, and a difficulty with temperature regulation. So in the broad picture of the formula, this can refer to other types of periodic symptoms that happen in a day, or in a month, like a menstrual cycle, or even seasonal, right? So cyclical symptoms that come and go with a pattern is a diagnostic sign for Xiao Chai Hu Tang and for Xiaoyang formulas in general. For the virus, what I see is both frequent variations in temperature, so happening, every 15 minutes or every half an hour or something like that. I also see variations within a day of both symptoms and temperature, where they feel cooler, and then maybe in the afternoon or the evening they get the fever, and it comes kind of regularly every day. And that can happen with symptoms too, where they feel so much better and then they get much worse. And then they get so much better and they get much worse. So this seems to be a very common presentation in virus. Let's move on to chest and rib side fullness, right? This is a very obvious symptom in the virus. When it gets to the lungs, it creates a stagnation in the lungs. This is a pivot place here. You can see the ribs. This is the pivot place, right? And the ribs wrap around the lungs and contain the lungs. And when the pivot place is blocked, the lungs are constricted and tight. And they try to breathe and they can't because it's blocked there. And so our patients may describe it as tightness and fullness, heaviness, painful even, inability to take a deep breath or to expand, shortness of breath, and the diaphragm can't go down. There might be cough, but there's not always cough. And yeah, so we don't have to have a cough. And this is a symptom that we often diagnose with abdominal palpation. I'm just gonna kind of lift myself here, where you palpate underneath the ribs, and you can find that sign very easily and immediately diagnose a Chai-Hu pattern or a Xiaoyang pattern from that abdominal palpation. But we can't do the palpation right now. So how do we diagnose this if the patient is not having obvious discomfort in their rib cage? What I like to do is have them hold their ribs here, the pivot place of the ribs right here, have them hold there and take a deep breath. And what does it feel like? Does it feel constricted? Does it hurt them, right? Is it even possible, right? And that can help you give the diagnosis. And when they have their hands around their ribs like that, you can ask them to then poke below the lower ribs. And is it really tender? Mine is, but I'm not sick, but mine is a little tender, right? So you can kind of get an idea then that there is this symptom, this chest and rib side fullness and tenderness. And then that can lead you to the Xiaoyang formulas. Again, with the virus, the symptom is very obvious. I like to confirm it a little bit, but it's pretty obvious. There is a mood that comes along with the Xiaoyang patterns. And this is not so needed in order to diagnose the Xiaoyang pattern in the virus, but it is interesting, and I think it will sound familiar, hopefully. So the mood is a reflection of the lack of free flow, right? And so it's an irritability or an anger or a gloominess or a burdened feeling because there's no room to spread up and out. There's no room for life to spread or happiness or joy or anything, right? So there's this kind of dissatisfied mood that comes along with the formula. And again, this is not necessarily going to be diagnostic for the virus, but it may be that people who have that pre-existing are more likely to get this pattern, right? And people who have this pattern are going to feel that way. I mean, I think most people who have the virus are feeling pretty grumpy about it anyway. So these are some of the most important symptoms, I think, that will help us diagnose the virus, right? I think it's useful to remind ourselves right here, the Xiaoyang areas of pathology or the pivot places, right? So we've said the eyes, and I would extend this to include the ears, the throat pivot, the chest and ribs, right? And the diaphragm, and also the lymph node places, which is also in the neck and places where the channel goes in the armpits, the neck, and the groin area. So it's important to realize those are places where symptoms are going to show up, right? When the pivot is blocked, symptoms will show up in the pivot areas. Other possible symptoms, there's actually more than this, because we know that when there's stagnation of qi, so many body systems can be affected, right? All of them can be affected. And so we can see the middle jiao pivot being affected and getting nausea, poor appetite, abdominal pain, and loose stools, and all of these things can happen. We can see fluid metabolism becoming affected. And actually that's quite common in the virus, right? We'll see phlegm and water accumulating in the chest. And that's because the ministerial fire cannot become the physiological fire to move and process fluids through the body. And so we end up with accumulation of fluids. The pulse, not so useful right now because we can't feel pulses. right? And I'll talk to you about one mistake I made with the pulse in one of my cases. But the pulse for Xiao Chai Hu Tong is wiry and thin, especially in the left one. All right. So let's talk about the formula, and let's talk about the herbs in the formula. Excuse me. So the chief herb, what I've done here is just put the dosages according to Bensky. These are the classical dosages, and in parentheses are what is more commonly used in modern times, right? And we'll talk about the dosage a little bit. The chief herb in the formula is Chaihu, right? Chaihu grows in the spring. Chaihu follows the movement of spring and the movement of wood, right? That reaching and spreading upward and outward, right? We learn it as an acrid, bitter, cool herb. And we learn it as an herb that clears heat. But what I found interesting, and when I was looking up the herbs in the Shenlong Ben Cao Jing, is that the Chaihu is actually listed there as neutral or balanced. And to me, that says that the real function of Chaihu, that Chaihu cools or clears heat by spreading and opening, by allowing the movement through the pivot and allowing the ministerial fire to descend, stop harassing the upper body, and become physiological fire. So Chaihu cools not by being cool, but by spreading, right? So the key to Chaihu is in its combinations. And when we combine Chaihu and Huangqin, they literally act as a key to unlock the pivot, right? So I'll talk about the combination in a second. I just want to note the dosing for Chaihu for the virus. I think we need to use a little bit more than 12 grams. And I was reading a paper by Huang Hong, and he recommends 20 grams for viral infections, and that felt like a good amount for me. So I bought I bought Chaihu as a single herb so that I could add it to pre-made formulas and make the dose a little bit higher than what is in most pre-made formulas. So when we combine Chaihu with Huangqin, Huangqin is a bitter and cold herb, also of the wood element, and Huangqin promotes down and in movement. So it counters the up and outward movement of Chaihu with an equally important down and inward movement. And in that picture of the tree, the Chaihu is the upper part of the tree and the Huangqi is the lower part of the tree, and they're spreading together unblocks the pivot, right? So again, literally the key to open the pivot place, right? And allow for free flow of movement from the exterior to the interior. So it's the combination that's really important, not just Chaihu. All right, let's talk about Banxia a little bit. Banxia, I usually keep it at the lower dose. I don't usually use 24 grams. I don't know if other people do, but usually around 12 is what I do. Banxia, we know, transforms phlegm, down bears, lung, and stomach qi. Right? The key in this formula, though, is not so much about the phlegm transformation, right? While Xiaoyang patterns can gather form from stagnation, the phlegm is not a primary pathology of the pattern or the formula, right? The key to Banxia is its ability to down bear the stomach and the lung qi, right? It's restoring the movement through the middle, right? And the pivot through the middle. It's also important to note that Banxia is also a throat herb. So Banxia can work on this pivot as well and help open that area. Banxia is paired with Shengjiang, and Shengjiang works with Banxia on promoting the downward movement, right? On regulating the middle jiao and restoring the downward movement through the middle jiao so that the fire can come down through and root in the bottom, right? What's interesting about Shengjiang, though, to me, is actually that Shengjiang does both. Right? Shengjiang is down-bearing, and we know how good it is at down-bearing lung and stomach qi, but that it also is a released exterior herb. And so it actually also brings warmth up to the surface. So Shengjiang, in a way, regulates the up and down all by itself, right? Both. Then we've got Renshen and Zhigancao and Dazao. And these three herbs work together. They are earth herbs, all three of them, earth herbs that moisten, nourish, and support the middle jiao qi, right? And support the zheng qi, and support the upbearing of the middle jiao qi. So Banxia and Shengjiang promoting the downbearing of the middle jiao, and Renshen, Zhigancao, and Dazao promoting the upbearing of the middle jiao. So I hope that makes sense. I paired up the herbs here to show you that the formula is really about movement, right? And Chai Hu and Huangqing, up and down, Banqian Shengjing, Shengjiang going down, Renchen Zhigan Cao Dazao going up, and then kind of playing with the combinations here, Banqian Huangqing, bitter and opening downward, Chai Hu and Shengjiang upward and spreading, right? So really the herbs in this formula are about the movement, right? Hope that makes sense. So there's a lot of combinations and modifications of Xiao Chai Hu Tang because it affects so many body symptoms, and because it can also be combined with different conformations. And so I want to mention a few of these. I feel like it's actually too much for me to mention them all, but I do find them to be really important. The most important ones are the ones that are actually formulas in their own right. The first one, and some of these formulas are going to be discussed in the next lectures in the series, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them. As you learn those formulas, you'll see how the combinations work together. Chai Xian Tang is Xiao Chai Hu Tang with Xiao Xian Xiong Tang for cough with sticky phlegm in a Xiaoyang pattern. Chai Po Tang is with Banqia Hopo Tang, where the symptoms of tightness and stuckness are in this part of the pivot in the throat, right? Chai Ping Tang, Xiao Chai Hu Tang with Ping Wei San. If we see like a thick white coat with cold damp in the belly, right, in the digestive system. Chai Ling Tang is really interesting, and I know that Sarah, my colleague Sarah, is going to be talking about Chai Ling Tang specifically, because Chai Ling Tang is Xiao Chai Hu Tang plus Wu Ling San, where the blockage in the pivot has affected the fluid metabolism. And we see water accumulation in the chest, and this is where we hear patients reporting they feel like they're drowning, right? We see water and phlegm accumulating in the chest because the lungs cannot do their job in down-bearing the water, right? So we see inhibited urination below and accumulation above. And so I think this pattern is really common in the virus, and I think really important. I haven't actually seen it myself, but I've heard a lot of cases of it. Some of the other modifications, Allison taught us the Shigan Ma Huang Tang, which I have seen combined with Xiao Chai Hu Tang. Shugao, when heat starts to become primary, right? Especially the heat in the chest with thirst and sweating, and we start to see a combined Xiao Chai Hu Tang pattern with Yang Ming pattern, right? I think that's an important modification that I use in one of the cases. Our herbs for cough that have been mentioned here. Sometimes patients have a dry cough in the beginning or a dry throat, and it's useful then to use a classical modification where we remove the banqia and substitute tianhua fen to transform phlegm, cool, and generate fluids. So I think that's a useful modification there, which I use a lot. Using ma huang or ma xing shigan tang in combination with Xiao Chai Hu Tang is interesting. And this question has come up in many forums. I think someone actually even asked you, Sharon. And somebody in one forum said it's prohibited, that you can't use Ma Huang and Chai Hu together. And I don't think that's the case. I haven't ever seen a reference to that. But I know when I first used it together myself, it felt like a little weird. It's like, wait, I've never done this. I don't know if this is okay. But it felt okay when I looked at the signs and symptoms, right? And so I think with the virus, we're seeing that actually using Ma Huang with Xiao Chai Hu Tang is very, very helpful. One, if we've got an unresolved surface with the Taiyang, but also because Ma Huang helps breathing, right? And our breathing is so constricted. People end up in the hospital because they can't breathe, and Ma Huang can be very, very helpful. And I think we see that Qingfei Paidu Tang formula, that big formula from China, has Xiao Chai Hu Tang and Ma Huang, Ma Xing Shigan Tang in it. So it's not a prohibited combination. I also saw it used in that paper by Huang Hong that I mentioned earlier. So some other herbs that open the chest are really important. The aromatic transformed damp herbs are really important, actually, because what we see is tightness and stagnation in the chest. And we also see a buildup of fluid and phlegm. And these herbs, the hopo, binglang, caoguo, and then the formula sanrantang, are aromatic, transformed damp herbs that can help ungunk the lungs. And again, someone's going to talk about these in the next lectures in this series. Moistening dry phlegm herbs are really important. When we get to the recovery stage, we see more dryness and we're tempted to use yin tonics. But actually, I think we want to be very careful with sticky yin tonics. I think we want to look towards these herbs that moisten dryness and generate fluids, okay? Blood stasis, I just put these ideas in here because there's a lot of talk about blood stasis as a residual factor with the virus, okay? Sorry about my cough. I know that I'm running low on time here, but I really want to talk about some cases. So,
Suzanne, take your time.
Thank you.
And I have a noisy truck outside. I apologize for the noise. And if you want, you can just mute yourself. If you want to just cough and drink water and then continue, because might as well just gather yourself. If you need to cough, we're loving it. The chat, this is awesome. I mean, hats off to Sharon's GMP, because every lecturer, including yourself, are just delivering gems. We thank you. We're loving this. And if you want to like cough or do anything, you can mute yourself too, and then do that.
Okay.
And then okay.
Thank you. Yes. I'm okay. I just haven't talked for this long in a while. It's been a while since I taught a class, actually. I'll have to start practicing more. So I had an interesting case that I wanted to discuss with you guys. Mostly, one, I think it's a good case, a Xiao Tang case, and it's also a case where many mistakes were made. Not necessarily by me, although I now looking back at it, I can see where I could have done better. But mistakes were made in the beginning of the treatment before I met with this woman. So she got sick first on 2/28. She's 43 years old. She awoke with a mild cough, mild scratchy sore throat. She had chills, body aches, extreme fatigue, headache, clear runny nose, and slight fever. This is not an uncommon presentation of an early stage of a flu or a cold, right? And if we treat it right, this person should never get very sick, right? If we treat the initial stage well, as Sally taught us in the first lecture in this series, or the second lecture in this series, if we treat the early stage well, the Taiyang stage, if we allow the Taiyang to come up and out and resolve, the patient should not get very sick. But what we see is that wasn't really done very well here, and the patient got very sick. So I would treat this maybe with I'd explore a little more, but maybe with Gui Zhi Tang or Xiao Qinglong Tang, right? These Taiyang formulas. She was actually treated with the following: multiple tinctures. Some of these may look familiar from the like immune formulas that have been talked a lot about on the internet. But basically we can see that most of these herbs are bitter and cold herbs, right? And bitter and cold makes things go down, right? And it's important to understand that this is purging, right? This going down using bitter cold herbs is the action of purging, right? It's not purging out through the intestines, but it's purging because what this patient needs is the promotion of up and out movement. And what she got was more down and in. And when we use the wrong treatment method in the patient, things get stuck, right? And then the patient gets sicker. So the patient did get sicker, and we can see the progression. She developed a high fever, feeling very sick. She felt delirious. She felt dizzy, lethargic, a lot of symptoms here that came in. And again, I haven't seen the patient yet. What's interesting is that even when she developed a high fever, she reported that she always felt chills, that even when her temperature was high, she felt cold and wanted warm drinks, right? Her tongue coat got really thick, like some of those pictures we see on the internet. And she's an acupuncturist, so she was able to tell me about her tongue. She was like, it's the most disgusting tongue I ever saw. And we can see that she felt dry and thirsty. There was damage to fluids, and her heart was racing, which is exactly what the clause from the Shanghan Lin told us would happen if we made things go down and in when we wanted them to go up and out, right? That there'd be palpitations and damage to yin and qi. And so now the patient is quite sick, and continued to take the antiviral herbs as listed above. So she continued to be sick. The fever dropped, and she got low-grade fevers that were alternating. And the low-grade fever in the afternoon, I guess, was diagnosed as a yin deficiency symptom, and she was given Liu Di Huangwan. But at this point, she was still very sick and still coughing a lot and had a lot of stagnation. So I do think that Liu Di Huangwan was also an inappropriate treatment. The herbs in that formula are sticky, right, and nourishing, and wasn't appropriate for a situation where there's a lot of stagnation. And so we can see by the time that I saw her, she was quite ill. So I saw her by video consult. This was my first video consult. I've learned a lot about how to do this since then, and how to get the information that I need from the patient in this format, because it's actually quite difficult. So when I saw her, her cough was much worse, and she felt very sick. She described it as a dry cough with a tickle in the throat and the upper chest, an inflamed, burning tightness, difficulty breathing, a little bit of sputum, but I don't think anything was coming up. There wasn't anything coming up. No sore throat, no swollen glands. She had chills alternating with low-grade fever and hot sensations. So she has the key sign for Xiao Chai Hu Tang of alternating fever and chills. And mostly no sweating. She said, I'm not sweating at all, even when I feel hot. She's getting an on again, off again clammy feeling, which can be seen as sweating, but very little. Dull, heavy headache, neck and shoulders achy and tight. Thirsty with no desire to drink. Nausea, poor appetite. So we can see the difficulty in the up and down movement through the stomach, right? She also had watery diarrhea in the morning. No pain, no bloating, just diarrhea, just loose stools. Which I think was a result of all the cold medicinals, right? Damaging the Tai Yin and damaging transformation and transportation. She has fullness in her epigastrium. Her ribs are very tender and constricted. So I did this breathing with her hands on her ribs and self-palpation, because like I said, I was lucky. This first patient was another acupuncturist. So she was able to kind of poke around and knew what to look for in her ribs, and she definitely had the sign. Her tongue was pale and puffy and scalloped with a thin white coat and a very, very red tip. So with dots on it, red dots, right? So a stagnation in the upper jowl and heat showing in the upper jowl, but the rest of the tongue, like, really pale and cold and deficient. In hindsight, I missed something here. Right? I diagnosed her with the Xiaoyang Tai Yin pattern, right? And I chose to give her Xiao Chai Hu Tang. In hindsight, I missed the priority of the neck and shoulder tightness. And I might have considered a Chai Hu Gui Zhi Tang, right? To help with the unresolved exterior. And I think it was because I wasn't seeing the patient that I didn't get to palpate her. Because normally in my practice, I would say, oh, your neck and shoulders don't feel well. Let me feel it. Let me feel, is it cold? How tight is it? What's going on there? And I didn't get to do that. So I feel like I disregarded that information a little bit. The other mistake I made that made me miss the Taiyang was that I had her take her own pulse to see if there was a floating pulse. I'm like, well, let me just see if there's anything left on the exterior. So I had her take her own pulse and tell me if she felt anything superficially. And she said no. And so I sort of threw out the idea that there was a Taiyang condition and continued to treat only Xiaoyang. So I think that was a little bit of a mistake, maybe relying on that and relying on her and missing the achy superficial layer. Anyway, still turned out to be a pretty good treatment. So I gave her Xiao Chai Hu Tang. I gave it to her in raw herbs. I was able to order it and get it to her husband within a couple hours, who then went back upstate, and she was able to have the herbs by that evening. So this was a great logistical treatment as well. So I took the banxia out and added tianhuafen. I removed the shengjiang and used ganjiang instead because of the weakness in the middle jiao and the coldness that I saw on the tongue there. I added gualo and hopo to open the chest, xingren and jiagang to further regulate the lung qi. The next day, she still felt weak, but her cough was much better. Her breathing was better. I talked to her in the morning. Diarrhea was better. It really looked much better. But then in the afternoon, everything came back, and the chest tightened up again, and the coughing returned. And so I realized, I think I need to do more here. I need to do something else. And so I talked to her again on day 3, which was a Friday, and she's feeling less weak. Her appetite and diarrhea are better. So things are getting better. The body is getting better. And the coughing was much better again in the morning, but then in the afternoon again, tightening up, breathing difficulties, and coughing fits. So I realized then that I hadn't released that exterior, and that so she's still stuck in this pattern, right, of like feeling much better and then getting worse, and feeling much better and getting worse. And I think it was because the exterior wasn't released. So at this point, the city started shutting down. I live in New York. Her husband's office had shut down. There was no way for me to get her the herbs because she didn't live in the city. She lived up in Westchester. And so then I was like, shoot, now she's still really sick and I have no way to get her herbs quickly. So I contacted another practitioner in the GMP, and he was able to see her. So he noted that she still had the aversion to wind and neck and shoulders still tight, and gave her a formula similar, but added a little ma huang. And I think in this case, the ma huang made all the difference. You can see he made some other differences as she was having a little bit of phlegm, and he added zhi bei mu and jie geng for the phlegm, and he also put in wu wei zi to help moderate the acrid properties. The patient continued to improve, cough getting less frequent, and we've been continuing to treat her, both of us. And so, yeah, the patient just continued to improve. Her cough got much better, nausea was gone, diarrhea got better, energy got better. She started to show some anxiety and some phlegm in the throat. And so the other practitioner gave her a combination with Banxia Hopotong, which made her feel very grounded and very calm. And she's continued to improve. And I actually did do a follow-up, but I want to move on at this point. So you can see, hopefully this case was helpful to you to see some mistakes and some problems, but also a fairly good resolution. The patient was sick for a full month, but only 2 weeks after we started working with her. So I mentioned using maybe Chai Hu Gui Zhi Tang for that patient. And Chai Hu Gui Zhi Tang is a variation of Xiao Chai Hu Tang, and it's proving to be a very, very useful formula, both in the early stage of this virus and in the later stages, in the recovery stages. Sorry, I'm trying to find my notes here. So Clause 146, after suffering from cold damage for 6 to 7 days, there is fever, mild aversion to cold, severe pain of the joints or extremities, slight vomiting, propping fullness in the epigastrium and the hypochondriac region. These symptoms indicate an exterior syndrome has not resolved. Chai Hu Gui Zhi Tang is indicated. So this formula is a Xiaoyang pattern. It's Xiao Chai Hu Tang with an unresolved Taiyang conformation. And so the combination is Xiao Chai Hu Tang plus Gui Zhi and Bai Xiao, right? And Gui Zhi and Bai Xiao harmonize the yin and the wei, resolve the Taiyang, release the muscle layer, soften spasms and constraint. So the symptoms that I look for the Taiyang to use this formula, I look for the achy body, the achy pain and stiffness in the neck and the back, and the back of the head, headaches, runny nose, and aversion to cold, right? So those kinds of symptoms, maybe even the pulse, like the floating pulse, which we don't have right now. But these kind of symptoms are quite common in the early stage, and they also are common in the resolution stage, in the recovery stage. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Chai Hu Gui Zhi Tang, but I think this little bit will help you identify these patterns if you already understand how to use Xiao Chai Hu Tang. Lauren, do I have time to do another case?
We have 20 minutes left, so just will take from questions, but I don't see any real hand raised yet, so go for it.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll try to go through it quickly, because I think this is also a good case of Xiao Chai Hu Tang used with different combinations. So this patient, thank you, Sharon. I see your comment there. This patient was a 35-year-old male. I did not know him from when I saw him. but he is the son-in-law of one of my regular patients. He has a history of chronic asthma. And, like I said, I didn't know him very well, but from what he described with the number of medications that he needs to use on a regular basis, his asthma is fairly severe. So I was immediately very worried for him. His asthma is exercise and allergy induced, worse with cold, manifests as chest tightness and wheezing, no water accumulation or phlegm for him on a normal basis. This is his regular pattern. So he woke up 5 days before I talked to him with symptoms of fever and achy body and sweating. He felt cold, sensitive to the touch. He had some really interesting symptoms. He particularly felt tender in his chest. His breathing was very constricted, but he said only on one side. And he particularly felt tender on the surface of one side of his torso and his ribs. He couldn't stand for it to be touched. And his breathing was more labored than normal on the one side. And he needed to use his inhaler very often. So this was very interesting to me and, brought me right to Xiao Tang because of the one-sided symptoms. But then the tenderness on the skin and on the surface was interesting and made me think more of Taiyang. So it already had me, that one symptom had me going to a combination of Taiyang and Xiaoyang. So by the time I had the consult with him, he'd become very much aware of the sensation on that skin, on the surface, very painful. He couldn't twist or turn or be touched. He was very sensitive to cold and draft and wanted to be covered. So again, there, a sign that the Taiyang is not resolved, right? His chest fullness was deep, tightness, shortness of breath, very hard to breathe. At this point, his inhaler's not working anymore. And he would use his nebulizer, which would help for a couple hours, but then returning. So again, I was quite worried about this man. He wants to be covered up. He had a tight upper back and shoulders, one-sided headache, poor appetite, no slight loose stools, good energy, but very tired right now. He's occasionally feeling hot for short periods of time. So he kept describing all these chills, right? That he felt cold, but then he was having the alternating fever and chills, but the chills were more prominent for him. Urination is normal. He feels cold and achy. His tongue was pale, but very prominent red stasis dots in the front, like really big, like red dots in the front, with a thick white coat, which led me to the stasis dots with the stagnation in the upper, and the dots kind of went along to the sides, right? Across the front and to the sides. I'm sorry, I don't have a picture there. So I diagnosed him with a Xiaoyang Taiyang concurrent pattern. And, like I said, there were signs that pointed to the Taiyang not being resolved and to the Xiaoyang pivot being blocked, right? So I increased the Chaihu by adding about 6 grams to the Chaihu Gui Zhi Tang base. I also added Herbal and Huoxiang and Baidoukou as a group of herbs to deal with that thick white coat that was coming in. And also, like, Herbal especially opens the chest and helps regulate the qi mechanism there. I added Ren to help deal with that thick white coat and the fluids. I added Ren because I had it. I actually would have preferred Fuling, which I think is better for the lungs than Ren, but I didn't have any at the time. So, and I used Ma Huang. And I used Ma Huang partly because of the surface that was so tight and this pain that he was having on the surface of the body, and also because his lungs were so constricted and a pre-existing constriction of the lungs to start with. I really wanted to open up that breathing so that he would get better. The second day, I think this is a good place to probably start to wrap up here. So he took the formula in the evening and through the second day, and then I talked to him the next evening. So breathing is much stronger. He said it's not as obvious to him and not bothering him as much. Still very sore in that torso area, still having the diaphragm block, but his neck and back don't feel achy. The skin sensation on the torso is still there, but less. And he's still alternating hot and cold, but now he's more hot than he was before. And so I kept the Xiao Tang base. I removed the Gui Zhi and the Huoxiang, both of which go up and out, right, to the surface. They're Taiyang herbs. And I added Shugao at 18 grams. So on day 3, he noticed every time he took the tea, he felt so much better, but symptoms kept returning. And by day 4, he's having no chills and he's feeling hot. So at this point, I'm seeing more Yang Ming, and you know, and his chest is still bothering him, right? So I'm starting to get a little worried about him, like maybe I'm doing the wrong thing, or maybe, but you know, he also felt confused because he said, well, I don't feel worse, but I feel worse, but I feel a little better and I don't feel worse. So I think that he didn't get that much worse. It's just that the symptoms changed. So I changed the formula a little bit, added more Shigao. I think I went up to 30 grams, which is, I would recommend a higher dose of Shigao when you see that heat and sweating and thirst. I added Guangdonghua and Zhi Shi to help with the opening of the chest. By day 5, he turned a corner. He's feeling better energy, less hot, still a little bit hot, and breathing much less labored. By day 7, feeling much better, less achy, no hot or cold sensations at all. Some feeling mucus in the back of his throat that he can kind of cough up, which I think is a good sign. He's still feeling worse in the evenings, and he's feeling dryness and thirst. So I continued the formula, but I changed the additions. I did gualo and tianhuafen to transform phlegm and generate fluids, along with zhimu. I kept the hopo, and I added jiagung and zisuya to affect the throat, so something like banqia hopotang. So by day 10, he's feeling much, much better. I want to continue working with this patient, and I did give him, I'm going to give him another formula probably today after I finish speaking with you guys. So I hope that case was helpful to you guys. I found it to be a really interesting case, and I was, like I said, kind of nervous for this young man and worried about him, but he seems to be doing just fine now. So I'm very pleased with that. I think I will end there. Thank you so much all for listening. I hope this was helpful to you, and I really appreciate having the opportunity to share it all with you. Thank you.
That was awesome. Guys, we're going to take some questions. We're going to do something a little different. We're just going to open up the mics right now, Sandro, for 30 seconds. Let's give our love and appreciation to Suzanne for 30 seconds, and then we'll do Q&A. That was awesome. Really awesome.
Yay, thank
Suzanne,
you so much.
that was really awesome.
So
Great job.
Good job and very appreciated.
All my friends.
very clear.
Thank you
so much.
Suzanne.
Awesome.
Suzanne.
Thank you very much. Done.
Suzanne.
Thank you. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you.
Yes, it was
Two
a
questions.
wonderful presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, guys. Suzanne, thank you, Sharon.
Cut off the mics.
Thank you. That was really
Done yet, guys?
Thank you.
Hold on a second. I can't hear you.
Come on. Don't waste time.
All right. Thank you very much. I just thought that would be nice to give Suzanne some love, well-deserved love.
Thank you. That was really nice to see everybody.
So a little housekeeping, and then Sharon, if she's still on, and Suzanne will take your questions. Again, our goal is community, unity, immunity. So just people ask questions about where's replays, etc. I will let you know on the healthyseminars.com/resource page, at the very top, we show you how to find replays. So check this out. We get emails all the time, but look, very first line, please scroll down for replays and full list. So the replays are usually there. So I just want to let you know they do exist. We keep them up for 48 hours, minimum 48 hours. And we do that because we don't want you really watching them in isolation. During this time, our focus at Healthy is knowledge and community. And I just know from personal experience, I do things like I join webinars that aren't from Healthy Seminars. And the ones that give me 24 hours or 48 hours that are important to me, I find the time and I watch them. I'm pissed at them because they only give me 24, 48 hours, but I watch them. And I have a whole bunch where they give me lifetime access, and I have intentions. So much so that every day in my calendar it says, do this. Every day it's listed as a reminder for 6 months, and I still haven't watched it. So I'm okay with you being angry at me as long as I get to create community and you get to learn. So That's our policy. It's 48 hours. Now, we have a lot of these herbal ones. So to be honest with you guys, they actually stay up often till Sunday. We're saying 48 hours, but they may stay longer. So even before you email us to waste, because you're losing time by emailing us and waiting us to respond, just go to the page, healthyseminars.com/Sharon, or go to the resource page, and you'll see, because we got a whole bunch of questions, where's the one from the other day? It's still there, actually. So you don't even have to email us. So I just want you to know the replays are there, they're there. And when this gets through the isolation, we get through this series, we will find a way to bring this back and let you review this again. Of course we will. So, but we just have so much happening, and it's, as you know, it's intense. It's this crazy time. And so we're going long days. And so we have what we have as our agenda, and we hear what your agenda is. And we apologize, we don't always reply, but we're doing our best to stay calm in the presence of uncertainty. And so that's how we keep our sanity. So we have our systems and policies in place. So I just want to let you know, there's always thinking behind it. And the thinking usually is for the greater good of all. That's usually our plan. So I just wanted to share that, because people always want to get into other people's minds. And sometimes people want to think the worst of what's in other people's minds. And I usually think people have good intentions. I know that that's at our team, our intentions. So that was that idea. The other thing is to let you know, for our herbal courses, our courses by Sharon, they're all still 25% off. However, we got so much free content. If you don't need the CUs, you don't want to go deeper, you can just keep coming here every day, because we got something every day for you. That's our intention during this time, that there is free access to tons of information. Do we have any hands up? We do. We're going to my friend. Karen Boker Tov, or Lila Tov. Karen.
So Lila Tov.
So nice.
Hi, Karen.
Before you ask the question, I just want to say I miss you, Karen. I miss your family. I miss coming out to see you guys this year, and miss seeing you in Vancouver.
I miss all of you too. First of all, thank you so much. I've been on every day, and this has been an amazing experience. Suzanne, thank you. This was such a great presentation, and Sharon, of course. Quick question regarding the cases. In both cases, you said that the tongue, it was either pale, there was the first one especially very pale, but the tip was extremely red. And I was wondering if you would consider adding an herb like Huang Lian, even at a very small dose, like 1 or 2 grams of it, to open up like that stagnation in the epigastrium area, and just allow that heat from the heart to go through down, as we studied, of course, in the GMP. Would you consider that, or would that be wrong in your thoughts?
Sometimes I would consider it. It really never came into my mind with these 2 cases. I think with Huang Lian, I'm going to look for more, a little more heat. Like the heat that I saw, and what I saw in the symptoms, was really the heat from the stagnation, right? And that stagnation was in the pivot, according to the other signs and symptoms. And so I didn't really think that I needed to open downward any more than the formula does already, right? So I think that stagnation, really that heat resolved quite well with the spreading of the formula. And so I guess that was just a judgment call, that it didn't feel like I needed that strong opening through the middle, right? I think if I had seen more heart symptoms and more epigastric symptoms with both of them, that I would have thought about the Huang Lian, right? Because Huang Lian goes through the epigastrium,
right?
In order to bring it down. Right. And I didn't really see a lot of epigastric symptoms. There was some nausea, but I saw the nausea as a result of the tightness of the pivot place, right? The tightness of the rib cage. And that's why the nausea was coming up, not from a disharmony in the lower place, the epigastrium. Okay. So for these patients, I didn't really see that epigastric symptom, so I didn't want to use the Huang Lian.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Next will be Maria.
Hi, Maria.
Hi, Suzanne.
Okay. You should have sound now, Maria.
Hi, Maria.
Hi, Suzanne.
Email.
No problem. What a great presentation. Thank you. Yeah. I was a little distracted with my daughter. I'm helping her on her online studies, but there was I wondered on the second case, when it turned that there was no more hot cold symptoms, but there was a lot of heat building up in the chest. How do you assess whether to go to Yangming formula or to stay with Xiaoyang formula?
I think there was a point, let me see, there was a point where he stopped having the chills. I feel like because the constriction was still so prominent with him that I wanted to stay with the same base formula.
Okay.
So
that was the main
call. But even though, you know, the hot and cold, like the alternating had kind of gone away, there was still a cyclical symptoms where he felt better in the day and worse later in the day. And that was kind of repeating itself every day. So I think that the cyclical symptoms were still there and the constriction was still so tight that I still wanted that spreading action. So and I added the Yangming, the Shigao in there.
I can't remember. Did he get a lot more phlegm as well at that point?
He did start to produce some phlegm in the throat towards the end. So after his breathing kind of released and after all the heat resolved, he has some residual phlegm, which then I added some more phlegm herbs and the symptoms had kind of moved into the throat, which was also different, but to me still a pivot place.
Okay.
Still a place that wasn't quite working well.
So if it had gone more really into the chest and had a lot of phlegm there, would you then maybe, and like could that tight feeling also be caused by the buildup of phlegm?
Yes.
So would you then consider Yangming? I'm just trying to figure out, like,
I would consider Yangming maybe, or some of the other, like the Sanrantang and the what's the other one? I lost it. The Xiao Xian Zhongtang to open the chest.
Okay.
Right? I would consider some of those formulas, maybe.
Thanks, Suzanne.
Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Maria. We're going to open up our mics again in a moment. I just want to remind you guys, I really want to encourage you on the resource page, the Ray Rubio talk. If you haven't heard it, give yourself this gift and tune in today. It is going to be so worth it. And if you've heard it, come again, because just the energy of us together, this community idea coming together, watch this. It is a very special lecture. Briefly, I will share with you that Ray passed away in March 2017. And we played this in April 2017 as the keynote at the Integrated Fertility Symposium. And I filmed it in late January of 2017. We knew he was going to pass away. And he wanted to address his peers one more time. And he was very ill at the time. And you want to talk about channeling in some universal energy. While I was holding the camera, I had to keep looking because he looked perfectly healthy and well during the 1 hour presentation without notes. Something came through him. It was amazing. So it's worth to watch. After that, he was wasted energetically after he did that. But for that hour, it was something to witness. And so I encourage you to come to that today. You can sign up. It's free. And then we have a bunch of stuff that was planned for the IFS that got canceled in Vancouver. We're doing them online, some of them. So we have one on Friday. We have one on Saturday. We have one on Sunday. And then the following week, we have one down here on the 26th. They're all from the IFS. And then you can see you can see what are paid for CEUs. And then you can see we have tons of free lectures still. And you can find all that on the resource page. And we'll keep adding stuff on that daily. We have a whole bunch of stuff in process that's not listed there. So check that out. If you go to healthyseminars.com/resources and you want to watch a replay of this, just go to that section. And in that section for the classical herbal, there should be a replay and it'll take you to the page, which actually ends in healthyseminars.com/Sharon, where we put these replays up. But if you're missing something, you're looking, email us. We'll respond to you, obviously, but usually they're up on those pages just to want to let you know. And lots of stuff coming out for you. So I would love us one more time to just create that community. When we unmute you, just so you know, as you chat, your image will come up and just look to see who's there. And this is your chance to have social connection. It's important. So let's do it. Love and appreciation.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Suzanne.
Everyone.
Thank you.
That was amazing.
So much.
Appreciate it. And thank you,
Good to see
Sharon.
everyone.
Wonderful,
Thank
wonderful,
you.
wonderful
Thank you.
presentation.
Great to see you all.
To everyone.
Hi,
Safe
everybody.
and well. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. Sandro.
This is awesome.
Thanks, Suzanne. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Guys, everybody, so great to see everyone.
Take care, everyone.
Liz.
Take care. Thank you so much.